Well, the Padres are in a legitimate slump when even Mike Shildt is willing to admit that his team isn't playing very good baseball right now. Tough sledding for the Padres, not how you want to start the month of September, but alas, this is where they are. Still, fortunately, in solid footing as far as the playoff race goes. So they got that going for them. No Derek this week, but very, very excited to have our buddy Eno Sarris back on the pod to share his insight on the struggles of these Padres and maybe a little bit of hope for what's ahead as we look forward to the playoff race and eventually, hopefully, fingers crossed, the month of October. First things first, thanks as always to OGs, the sponsor of the On Friar podcast. Appreciate all they do for On Friar. Padres going back on the road. So if you need a place to catch a game, have a good meal, got a great beer list as well. Obviously, college football, NFL, tons of TVs in all of their San Diego County locations. So a great place to catch a game or two, good meal, good beer, hang out with some friends. Always a good time. So shout out to OGs for all they do for the On Friar podcast. Without further ado, the walk-up music. By NBC 7. No Derek Togerson this week, but very, very excited to have our friend, you know him well, Eno Sarris of The Athletic back on the pod. Thanks as always for your time. You were on Ben and Woods this morning as well, so doing the San Diego media rounds. Made sure to listen.
Make it down there.
I was like, yes, you do need. We were just talking. There's always some new spots that you need to check out. And I made sure to listen to Ben and Woods because it's always like, well, I don't want to hit Eno with the same exact questions he just got, 6 or 7 hours ago. You did have some interesting insights on Fernando Tatis Jr. that I would like to get into as well. You and Dennis Lynn had the piece a couple weeks ago or so just about kind of his swing and that maybe impacting his power and all that. I wanted to start big picture with you. 2-8 in their last 10, I think it is. They've dropped a few series in a row now, struggled on the road, injuries, guys not playing to their capabilities, rotation's kind of been a mess. How should Padres fans feel at this stage, given all that, but with a team that is still, at this moment, solidly in the playoff race?
I think that these sort of things are actually much more common than people realize. 6-game losing streaks are very commonplace in baseball. And you look at the last few people who've been in the World Series, almost all of them had a 6-game losing streak in late August, early September. This is not something to worry about by itself. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't components of it that are not worrisome. I'm not saying that they'll necessarily come out of it, but let's say the Rangers were bad at times. The Dodgers, the year they won it all they were terrible at times. Like, people were like, you have no rotation, you have no shot. I was talking to writers, they were covering the team, and they're like, I think they'll be one and done in the playoffs, and they go all the way. So, October's its own beast. The whole thing is get in. And it looks still pretty good for them. I do have some news for you. At some point, we'll have to get to the starting rotation. I've been working on a power ranking of the rotations for the postseason. I don't know if you want to get into that now, but it's as interesting, maybe in a negative way, as the Tatis news is in a positive way. But I think my general thing is keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, and I think you're right on there. And I think I've noticed some of the fan base kind of now shift to that sentiment of there was so much excitement after the trade deadline. It seemed like you had such a complete roster and a roster that was capable of anything. And I think the sentiment has now shifted to, okay, this team looks bad right now, but they're probably going to be in the playoffs. Hopefully Michael King is a part of that. Hopefully Xander Bogaerts is a part of that. Guys that are a little bit dinged up, hopefully they get a little bit healthier and you get rolling. And if you do that in October, I mean, 2022, they were a mess. Bob Melvin lit into them after a Thursday night disaster against the D-backs, and they do what they do. And so there's so much time for that to happen. But maybe I think, like, if that's the optimistic viewpoint, I think maybe the pessimistic viewpoint is like, okay, maybe the ceiling isn't quite what we thought it would be, with a rotation that struggles, with general issues playing on the road, with Tatis and Machado not being themselves. Like, there's always the capability, anything can happen, but maybe a little bit less optimism that the ceiling is NLCS World Series. Maybe it is like, hey, if you win the wild card, get to the NLDS, mix it up a little bit. Like, maybe that's what this team is capable of.
We had Rangers versus D-backs as a World Series,
True.
you know. So I really think it's get in and keep going. The positive, the negative for the offense is that power is important. Power is one of the most important things in the postseason. Teams that out homer their opponents have some ungodly, like 800 winning percentage. So, like, you know, power is super important, and this Padres team doesn't slug, but that's where the Tatis piece comes in. You know, Tatis has been, I think, the guy that you'd circle that could easily slug more than he's been slugging. And that was our piece, was about the fact that Tatis was letting the ball travel more than he ever had, and perhaps too much. And when I compared Tatis to people who had the exact same swing characteristics in terms of tilt, in terms of shape of swing, and I looked at the people who had the same swing characteristics but got the ball out in front further, and they all had better overall production, better home runs, maybe slightly bigger whiffs. And that's what I would say to Tatis is like, hey, man, I think you were a better hitter when you struck out more. I know that's tough to hear because we don't like strikeouts. We don't like to watch them. They're not that much fun. This Padres team has an identity built on making contact. It is the best contact team in baseball. But for Tatis, the trade-off is, do you want to be like a 25, 30 homer hitter that strikes out, around league average? Or do you want to be a guy who strikes out better than league average and is more like a 18 to 19, 20 homer hitter? Like, I think it's clear which one is more productive. And the good news is, since that piece came out over the last 3 weeks, he's going and getting the ball further out in front than he has, in the last 2 years. So I think that 400 plus foot homer to center field, as much as it's just one thing and you don't want to read in too much to it, sometimes one swing can actually mean a lot, especially because he got that ball out in front and, he wasn't sort of filleting it to the opposite field, which, that's catnip for traditionalists, but, it's not necessarily the best way to make the most out of his power.
Just merely a coincidence that you and Dennis put this piece out and then his approach at the plate changes within a few weeks?
Well, he wasn't doing well, so he's ready to change something himself. And we know that at the same time, no, I'm not taking credit for it. What I'm saying is, at the same time, he was looking for stuff. He's looking for things. Like, we knew it, right? When he was doing the toe tap and the nod and the thing and the open and the close, like, we saw it. So I think something just clicked after that, but it happened to be clicking in this way that sort of, I think, is really important. So once you get Tatis online, now you have a team that, his power online. Now you have a team that makes contact with the best of them and can slug, and they did a really good job at the trade deadline of taking the weakness, the bottom of the lineup, and making it a lot better. So this is a complete lineup, I think, from top to bottom, righties, lefties, power, contact. If Tatis is going like he can, then I'm not worried about this lineup, actually.
And I think a lot about the Fangraphs piece after he missed a bunch of time with the shoulder surgery, and they talked about other players, Cody Bellinger being one of them, and kind of some of the drop off after shoulder procedures and what, a WRC plus looks like before compared to after. And a lot of those guys go from like a 140 or 150 to like a 125 range. And last year, I remember thinking about that piece and being like, well, he's avoided that. Like, I think he's all right. And you go to this year and you're like,
well, see,
okay.
That's a good sign, though. That means, I think,
Right.
You also look at his bat speed. You saw like a precipitous sort of bat speed exit velocity differential for Cody Bellinger before and after. You didn't quite see the same for Tatis. Now, obviously, he's had some other issues that cloud, long-term analysis of Fernando Tatis, in terms of like, where do I draw my lines before and after? But when I was doing that piece, I decided I'm just going to look at the last 3 years, the last 2.5 seasons, and not worry about what he looks like compared to that amazing first couple of years.
2021 in
And so
particular.
you
Yeah.
can see that even post injury, post suspension, post anything, his power was down, and so he can get that back. Like theoretically, he can get that back. He was down at a bit of a low point, and I think you're going to see a pretty hot Tatis going forward.
Yeah. Well, that's great news. Okay, you teased it. Let's get to the bad news. What do you got on the rotation?
Yeah, so I was a little surprised to see this. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the top 12 rotations for basically the playoffs, the playoff rotations. And what I've done is I've shrunk them down to 3 pitchers.
Mm.
And I think for San Diego, you'd say, well, that's probably a good sign for us. Like you don't necessarily want to count your 5th pitcher in this mix right now, not especially after the last game. And so I expected, focusing on Michael King and Dylan Cease and Nick Pivetta for them to do pretty well, for them to be near the top. They were not. And then when I added a sort of subjective reasoning on top of it, they ended up last. Now, so the good news is if you just look at projections, there should be 4 teams worse than them. So they should be, the 8th ranked playoff rotation. But already that's sort of tinged with a little bit of bad news. That means that the Yankees and Astros and Mariners and even the Tigers have better playoff rotations by projections, which was a super sober look at it. But then when I added my subjective thing being like, well, the projections assume full health for Michael King, and the projections assume that Dylan Cease will pitch to his peripherals, his strikeout rate, his walk rate, the things he's done in the past, they're all in line. He should be pitching as well as he did last year by all the numbers. But when you're this far into a season, you're kind of like, I don't know. Can I really believe that the old Dylan Cease is just going to show up just because he's striking guys out like he used to? Like, that's testing even my belief, because I've been ranking Dylan Cease in the top 20 starting pitchers all year, and it's starting to wear on me. I do like the new Dylan Cease with 4 pitches. I think that might be his way out of this conundrum, but I just felt like the projections say they're 8th. I'm going to make him 12th because I don't even know what Michael King's velo is. I haven't seen, he hasn't gotten on the mound for me in the major leagues post, injury. He hasn't gone deep into a game. How deep is he going into games? So I just thought there was a lot of questions. And for some of the other teams where the Mariners, right, they've struggled, as a rotation, but they go 5 deep. So if they say, oh, Luis Castillo, sorry, you're not in the rotation, we're going to put Brian Wu in, that's something the Padres they're not going to do. They're not going to be like,
Hugh Darvish.
Yeah, Hugh Darvish is a wild card too. I do think that the Padres ranking, it reminded me a little bit of the Mets ranking, where it's like, who's in the playoff rotation?
Yeah.
Like, what is it? Who and which versions of them? Is it the good you? Is it the bad you? And you're alternating, I think, based on command from game to game. You're alternating good Yu Darvish and bad Yu Darvish, almost all due to his command. And then Dylan Cease gives you 3 or 4 in a row. So there's a chance that their playoff rotations middle of the pack for playoff rotations, and then they have the good. They have one of the best bullpens, even with their loss, and they have a really good lineup. This is how we got Rangers D-backs. Do you remember any of the starters and Rangers D-backs? It was like, you can't do Brandon Pfaadt versus Nate Eovaldi 3 times in a row. So there were other guys in that rotation that you don't remember.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. I think if you talk to fans at the moment, they'd say, well, we have one pitcher we have any sort of confidence in a 3 or 5 game series, and that's Nick Pivetta. Hey, they alter the schedule, so your game 1 starter, you'll see game 4, and so you need less need for that 4th starter. So that would, I think, benefit.
That's why I settled on 3. Most of the 5 game series, they're going with 3-man rotations.
As far as Darvish goes, I think for a lot of us, it's been like, okay, he's in his spring training. He's warming up. I mean, he's pitched now for 2 months. So I think, when do you start to move off the well, he's coming into his own and start to get to the he's 39 and maybe this is just what we have?
Yeah, I'm a little the latter just because, when you look at his game logs and you see the thing that has become steady is his stuff. It's not what it was. And we know that he's dropped the arm angle to, try and recover what he had. And we know that it's kept him on the mound. It's got him on the mound again. And that he still has like 8 sort of league average pitches, right? So that's why it matters what his command is start to start, because he has more in common now with a Seth Lugo, than he does with the AC once was, because he's now just a wide arsenal guy that every game goes up there and searches around to find out which pitch he has command of, which pitch is working that day. And that's why some days he finds it and some days he doesn't. I think that extension was a little bit of a poor idea because of his age. But but on the other hand, I think I love you, Darvish. So it's like, when he's going well, you're like, yeah, that one. Can we have that one? But when you have somebody drop an arm slot, now Sean Manaea did it, and he just did it because he wanted to, and he thought he could be Chris Sale. He did, have a lot of injuries this year, and I would just say generally the thought in the past has been that if you're making a massive change in your arm slot, it's due to injury. It's due to not feeling good. It's not a good sign. There's been a little bit more people doing it on purpose recently with biomechanics. And like, for example, Adrian Moore-Home has changed his arm slot. And it's been good for him. I think it's made him healthier and it's made his mechanics better. So it's not always a bad thing, but in his case, it just feels like he was hurt and he wasn't coming back, and he was hurt and he wasn't coming back. And he's like, okay, I dropped my arm slot, I'm back. And you're like, you're feeling that good.
You might not be back, the
Yeah,
way
exactly.
that the
That's
Padres
sort
need
of
you
what
to
I'm
be.
saying. Yeah.
As far as Dylan Cease, like I wonder how much of it is like something that doesn't necessarily show up on kind of the stuff gradings, which is like what's going on up here, because as you said, like the stuff always looks good. Mike Shildt commented a couple weeks ago, like he has starts where it's like no hitter through 3 innings. You're like, okay, we might be seeing something special. And then like a guy gets on, or there's an error or like a bloop, and things just crater for him. And it happened, again the other day. It seems like he's like 1 inning, 1 at bat away from being really, really good. And for whatever reason, things go sideways, and he can't adjust or adapt to that. Do you think that could be a factor in as well? Because like as we're trying to figure out what in the world is going on with him, I think it's maybe easy to assume that like it's a mental thing that's kind of getting in his way a little bit.
I mean, I hear you. I've always enjoyed my conversations with him just because he's a different cat. He'll say things that surprise you. And even when they interview him in the dugout and stuff, he talks about like, somewhat being a loner and stuff. So he's like he's just a different dude. I'll have to say this though, when things are unraveling, things like that, like the game plan is put together by the front office, the manager, the pitching coach, the catcher, and Dylan Cease. You know what I mean? So like if he's constantly running to problems in the 4th and 5th innings, is that on Dylan Cease? I mean, I don't know. I think that on some level you got to switch up your game plans. And that's why I was really happy to see when he started really bringing in the sinker. And he was really doing the knuckle curve in late July and early August. And I think his best stretch, I mean, he had that one stinker against the Mets. I think to some degree, pitchers are fickle creatures where like he'll do this thing that's good and then he'll have a bad start that may be bad for different reasons, but he'll think, oh, I went to the curveball too much. That's why the Mets, hung a 5er on me. Not that, oh, the Mets are a really good offense and maybe a couple things went wrong and, maybe it actually was a good approach. So as a pitching coach, sometimes I think you make a suggestion, they implement it, and you just hope for like some good luck for the first couple of starts, so they believe in the thing that you just said that you think is good for them. But in the end, when Dylan Cease throws like 10% sinkers and at least 10% curveballs, most of the outcomes have been good. And there's not a ton of starts like that because he doesn't seem willing to kind of keep trying it. But that's if I had him in a room, I would say try to make it a large arsenal, because that's what, when you look at third time through the order penalty, like people that fall apart in the fifth and sixth inning, like seeing the lineups for third time, the biggest problem is short arsenals, because what happens is the best hitters in the game have now seen your fastball, they now have seen your slider, and they've seen you play the game. You're like, oh, fastball low and slider low, or fastball high and slider high. Like, how many games can you play with two pitches, right? So at some point they keyhole you and they guess right, and it's a problem. So that's what, if I was him, if I was his pitching coach, I would just say, and I think Managerial is one of the best pitching, maybe the best pitching coach in baseball. And I'm sure he's saying this stuff because you can see it in the game logs. You're like, oh, there's the sinker, there's the curveball. Can we do all four, please? Can we try all four just for a little bit?
We just saw Mason Miller throw an immaculate inning on all sliders, so that's not going to help.
Yeah, right. It's gonna be like, wait, I can't do that. Yes, for one inning you can do it, Dylan. We want you for 6.
You and Dennis just need to write the piece, and then Padres will read it, and then he'll be fixed. The Ryan Bergert, Stephen Kolek for Freddie Fermin trade. How is that looking a month later?
Oh, that's really interesting. My first instinct was that it was a bad trade. And it's not that I don't think that Freddie Fermin is very good. I think he's actually very good at the things that Elias Diaz is not good at. I think he's a young, good defensive catcher. And I saw some analysis recently that suggested he's one of the best game callers. So you've got a guy who's really good at the intangibles. Now, I do think, giving up 2 guys that were controllable young starters now seems like it's pretty painful, and part of that is because, like, when you're trying to get through September, like, Ryan Bergert could have come on for Nestor Cortez earlier. Like, Nestor Cortez did not look good in that start. He could have given up 1 homer. If you had Ryan Bergert, you say, hey, Ryan Bergert's pretty good, let's get him out there, and that would have kept them. I mean, the Padres scored 4 or 5 in that game.
Yeah.
So if you'd taken Ryan Bergert, you put him in after 1 homer, you might have won the game. So just having Bergert and Kolek is that kind of depth. AJ seems fine with trading away depth. Like, we've done this before, and it's fine when your stars are good and they're healthy. And maybe it'll be fine when King comes back and everything's fine again. But I've seen a couple of times where I was like, man, they could really use Bergert and Kolek right now.
Well, especially when you look at like the numbers they've put up since I think Kolek's only started once and he had a quality start. Bergert's had a lot of, like, I think even yesterday, 5 innings, 1 run, which, given that they've averaged like 3 2/3 innings the last, week plus, you would take that. Anything on Sears, like, one of the benefits of that trade, we thought, was, okay, this is a guy they're going to have for a little
Sears
while.
replaces Bergert. Like, Sears replaces Bergert as depth. He's optional guy that can be up and down. And he hasn't been good.
Yeah, and when everything washed out, you're like, okay, they traded Kolek and Berger. That seemed like a lot for Freddie Fermin, but they got 2 starters back. And not knowing too much about JP Sears, you're like, if he can come close to replicating what those depth guys have given them, then they'll be okay. And Nestor Cortez is a guy that we're familiar with, and it just hasn't really panned out. But, we evaluate these trades for years going forward. And so now it's like, okay, what would the outlook be on JP Sears in spring training of 2026, because so far the first impression has not been awesome.
Yeah, I'm trying to see, they obviously had some tweaks for him. The changeup, has actually been performing a little better with the Padres, and it looks like it has more drop with them. So I bet you they had some sort of change-up grip change for him. But it also means that he's used the slider less. He used to be using the slider 34%, 40% of the time. And instead of, and the problem with the changeup is you can't, like, you can use a slider 30 or 40% of the time. Not a lot of guys who can command the changeup so well that they throw the changeup 40% of the time. And so what has happened was he's replaced some of the sliders with fastballs, and fastballs are not his best step forward. Like, they're just not his, like, he just, they're not very good. He's 92 and it's not, it's okay movement, but it's not super exciting. So I would just counsel him to throw more slop, basically throw more sliders, throw more sweepers, and kind of slow everybody to death. I think that's still in him, and I think he can be a decent up down guy for them, and maybe they're number 5 next year. And so that's, I don't hate that they got him in the Miller trade. Like, that's fine, but there's some top line stuff that I'm a little nervous about. It's like, you just traded a lot for a closer. You know, I know it's team control and it's a great closer, and he just had the immaculate inning, and you just traded a lot for like a backup catcher, or like a, you know what they call him? They call him like sort of second, like, was it second tier? Like, he's not like a playoff catcher,
Right.
You know, he's more like a decent, you know, sort of average-ish catcher, which has a lot of value. But, you know, it's like when you start looking at the ins and outs, you're like, man, that was a lot.
Yeah. And people are looking at the ins and outs.
Yeah, right. I mean, he's traded away so much talent. It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, you just look at the Nationals, you're like, my God.
Yeah. Got anything on Merrill other than he's been injured a bunch?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously affected him in a lot of ways. Like, you know, this is a guy who last year stole, you know, 16 bases, and the year before was 20 or something. So, you know, he's lost some speed, which would have helped him turn some singles into doubles. And, you know, I think that also affected his batting average on balls in play, which is down a little bit. And, you know, I think some of it was he was a little bit maybe over his skis in his first year. Like, if you look at his slugging percentage in his first year, especially his what's called isolated slugging percentage. So that's slugging minus batting average. So basically just his extra base hit rate. It was better than any year he had in the minors. So I think he set the expectations pretty high with that rookie season. And I think he's just a little bit below that right now. And I think his true talent is somewhere in between. So I think he's going to be fine, is what I think long term. I'm interested to see what happens with his wheels. Like, if anything happened this year that really affected his wheels, because you want him to have speed and center. But if I was sort of back of the napkin projecting for next year, I'd still give him like a 275 average. I think I'd still give him, you know, 25 homers and like 10 steals in center field. So, you know, there's a lot of good in there, and I wouldn't worry too much. It's enough of it is injury, enough of it is coming back from maybe was a little bit of high watermark.
And being 22 years old in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, I mean, Major League, like, he also, like, another thing is he likes to go oppo. You know, his natural swing is oppo. One thing that I've seen up here in San Francisco is that Elliot Ramos has an oppo swing, and he just keeps getting busted inside. And then you have this choice of, like, do I still try to go oppo with the inside pitch and just create these crazy spin, like, weird, you know, balls in play that aren't really ideal? Or do I develop the ability to turn and burn? I think we've seen enough from Merrill where I'm like, you've seen pull side homers from him, right? Like, he just, you know, I think it's difficult sometimes as a younger guy to, like, when do I pull the pull side approach on, and when do I, like, just go the opposite way?
Yeah. And I think, you know, so much of going back to our original topic is, like, if Tatis clicks, if Merrill clicks, you know, and Manny, of course, being another one. I mean, I looked it up just out of curiosity because, you know, Tatis and Manny both homered on Wednesday. You're like, when was the last time both guys homered in the same game? And it was July 24th. And after yesterday, where they homered twice total, They've now had 5 homers combined between the two of them since July 24th. It's a long, long time to have 5 home runs between the two of them. And, Manny got off to such a good start, and he had like 5 days where he slowed down and everybody kind of panicked. And then he looked like, 2022 Manny Machado again. And, he's flirting with the 300 season as of a month or so ago. And I think that ship has probably sailed at this stage, just given the last month. But I think it was so encouraging what he did last year and what he did to start this year. Again, one of those guys you have faith that's going to pick it up, and Manny's been through these stretches before and has looked really, really good on the other side. But again, just kind of concerning, and part of the overall dissatisfaction with this team is, offensively just not having the type of kind of juice, so to speak, that we're accustomed when those guys aren't hitting like those guys. And Manny's not being a 30 home run hitter, which we've been accustomed to seeing.
I mean, I hate to point out something that is really obvious true about all three, and wonder if it's a coaching effect or some sort of team-wide effect. But Manny Machado, Fernando Tatis Jr., and Jackson Merrill, and the last one comes with an asterisk, his career hasn't been long, but it's still true, have the lowest pull percentage of their careers right now. Now, if you have, and Manny Machado for his career has had elite bat speed. Until this year, he was 90th percentile or better in the years that we tracked bat speed. And if you have elite bat speed, you can do the Juan Soto thing, basically, where you let the ball travel, you get longer to make your decision. It helps your contact rates. You can go out to the opposite field because you have elite bat speed. Manny's dropped from 90th percentile to 84th percentile in bat speed. Now I don't know how concerning that is. It still seems pretty good. Tatis is at 77th percentile when he was at 86th percentile last year. Still seems pretty good, but it's a little bit lower. And so what happens then is you do cost yourself power by not pulling. Do I want them to have 50% pull rates and 28% strikeout rates? Not really. But do I think that all three of them could selectively pull? I do think that. And I don't know. I see Manny like serving those doubles into the opposite field, and it feels so good. And you're like, you could do that forever. And it looks so sweet the way he does it. Just a sweet swing. But what if those were homers? It's all I'm saying. Some of that pull when he was at his best, the years that that he hit 37 and 35 homers in Baltimore. I don't know if he necessarily had a lot more bat speed, but he had 42% pull rates back then. Right now, he's a 36% pull rate. That's like, it seems like a small thing, but
I was actually going to ask you, because I look through these numbers and I don't contextualize them as well as you do. And so you see, okay, 42 to 36. If you see 42 to 25, you're like, okay, that's significant. But 42 to 36, like, you can tell us that that's not insignificant. That means something.
I mean, it's hard to know. It's hard to know exactly. But, when you say like, well, it's the lowest of his career, like, okay, so every other year his career he's pulled more. And, he's also hit more fly balls back in the day in Baltimore. So when you add those two together, like, the best batted ball in baseball is the pulled fly ball. Like, it just is. It's like, if you look at the numbers, it's like a 1500 slug. It's a 1500 OPS or 1500 slugging, I think, pulled fly balls, and opposite field fly balls are like a 400 slugging. Like, it is that different. So, if you have, let's say he has 6 fewer, it still could be 3 homers in there. You add 3 homers to what he's done this year, and all of a sudden he has 25 headed towards 30, and nobody thinks there's any different, right? Yeah. So that's how different like 3 home runs can be. Like, if you had 3 extra home runs right now, I don't think we'd be talking about any sort of power outage from Manny.
Yeah. And like, going back to the Tatis conversation, like, it made me think of Xander Bogaerts, because it seemed like before he kind of hit his groove, And then when he did, and Derek and I have talked about it, there are a couple swings where it looked like these are like powerful home run swings where the guy is swinging through the baseball, as opposed to so often this season where it looked like he was just trying to like put the barrel
Punch
on
it.
the baseball and hope for, punch it for like a little blooper, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
as opposed to just kind of, for lack of a better phrase, like letting it rip, And so it's like being fine versus being like a powerful, instinctive athlete, I guess.
You can like there's also the aspect of defense, right? If you are doing the same thing over and over again, you're just going to the opposite field, the defense will react and the
Mhm.
outfielder will start standing. One of the biggest things that people don't know is that the outfield defense has been more outfield shifting has been more effective in terms of reducing balls in play than infield shifting.
Oh, really?
We don't see it because we're like they're just outfielders and they don't go to a new position like they used to. Like Manny goes into right field, that's really, oh wow, look at that. But the little things where they're like going 5 steps this way and 5 steps this way, like teams have dialed that in to the point where it's stolen the efficacy of balls in play in the outfield. And so if you're hitting balls in play to the outfield to the opposite field a lot, then the defense will react to that within days, maybe a week, and start standing in a new place. And now this is what I think of with Luis Arraez. Like, I think it's really obvious to Arraez because he's always trying to go to the opposite field. He's at the plate mimicking an opposite field. You see that thing he does with his hand? Like he's like mimicking the opposite field. He's looking over the opposite field. He comes to the plate and looks to the opposite field before he starts.
I think he's even gone so far as like pointing. Like,
yeah, he kind of points towards it. Yeah, and I think when you look at, he gets played the shallowest in the opposite field of anybody. They're starting to have people just stand like right where his balls are landing. What I liked the last couple of days from Luis Arraez is, and I sound full note like, oh, everybody pull the ball, but like you saw those couple of Arraez like daddy hacks the last couple of days. He hit that homer. I mean, yes, and a couple of those are going to be pull fly balls, but you might be able to move the defense around. You might be able to move your spray chart a little bit. If you start pulling a little bit, you start moving those balls and play off of where that outfielder is playing. So, I mean, some of it's just not being predictable. And, Tatis was letting the ball travel so predictably this year that going and getting the ball can be just a small little change that can do it, and Manny's so good at both things because when he hits the mammoth tanks, they're pull side.
Yeah.
Those like, 20 rows in, like those are pull side. So I'm actually not that worried about Manny because I think he's a bit of a savant. And I think he just sort of plays with his contact. It's what we're talking about is contact point. When you make contact out in front of the plate, you get pull side. If you let it travel, you get opposite. And I think that Manny actually has like plays around with that contact point a lot.
Yeah.
He lets it travel sometimes when he thinks, they're going hard on him, and he'll just, put it to the opposite field. And then when he thinks he's got somebody dialed in, his eyes light up a little bit and he, goes pull side.
It would be irresponsible to not bring up Luis Arraez in this conversation because there's been a lot of consternation and debate about him and people wishing Mike Shildt would maybe move him in the lineup. I've said it, I haven't loved having him behind Tatis. Another Fangraphs piece from earlier this year talking about how like it's like Arraez kind of has become a caricature of himself a little bit. Like all the things that made him great, he's maybe gone too far with, and you see it with power numbers, you see it now with the average, that sort of thing. The resistance to striking out by swinging at ball 3 and ball 4, the stat you take 2-0 at the best pitch you're going to see
the worst
entire
OBP
game.
of his career, yeah.
And that's not going to sniff a batting title this year.
Yeah, I've seen some research. I tend not to care too much about batting order because the most powerful research when it comes to batting order is just that you get more plate appearances at the top, so you just want your best players near the top. And I think there's still a case for him to be useful at the top. However, this idea that like, oh, the 2-hitter moves the 1-hitter that got on base over. I think that's misguided. First of all, how often does that happen in that order? Maybe the first inning, and then there's other innings where, he comes up with 2 outs or 0 out, whatever, like it all kind of goes out of the door after the first inning. And in the first inning, I would actually rather get a plate appearance from Jackson Merrill than Luis Arias, or from Manny than Luis Arias. So if I had 3 guys that I wanted to put at the top, it would be Jackson Merrill and Fernando Tatis Jr. and Manny Machado, because those are the best hitters on the team. So that's an argument for not being in the top 3. Now, I have seen some more granular analysis that's like, hey, the 5 spot's a really great place for somebody who makes a lot of contact. I've seen that. And I think it makes sense because you have your best 4 hitters ahead of them. Like, how many times do 2 of them get on? And when do you want a rise up? Guy on third, less than 2 outs.
And a little bit of the conundrum now is for a lineup that struggled to get impact lefties for so many years, especially if you take out Juan Soto. Like, now you have Gavin Sheets, Brian O'Hearn, Luis Ariz, Jackson Merrill, and Jake Cronenworth. And so it's like, how do you configure this lineup? And doing kind of the mental exercise through the year, even before they got O'Hearn, it's like, find myself stacking up a bunch of lefties. And you would know better than I. But it seems like you run into this position where, if conventional wisdom is to alternate, it gets a little bit harder to do that, because Merrill is like the one guy where you're like, yes, put him for sure in the top 3. It's very easy to end up in a situation where you're like, you got Sheets, you got O'Hearn, you got Cronenworth, Rise, all kind of back to back. What do you do with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Because I guess it becomes a question like who bats 4th, really.
A little bit.
I think Laureano could bat 4th, but then you'd have 2 righties in a row. Yeah, how do you do that? Do you go Tatis Machado? That doesn't seem right. So Tatis Merrill, that's okay. So then you got a lefty, and then you go Machado, so that's a righty. I guess you could do a rise 4th. It's like you have to just leave behind the idea of cleanup hitter, like needs to have power, right? Like it's just a guy who comes on base with other people on base, because if you do that, you put Arias 4, you could put Laureano 5, and now you've pretty much got rid of your problem.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can go Cronenworth 6, Fermin 7.
Because then, you could do O'Hearn cleanup, Laureano 5th, or Rise 6th, but then your whole explanation for the 5 spot.
I mean, what's true for 5 is probably just as true for 6. So like you could do that way too, yeah.
And then Bogart, Bogarts is one of the righties that would ordinarily be in here. One of the last things I wanted to ask you, and this kind of came up this week with Mike Shildt, because we see, is it Tuesday, I believe it was, Mason McCoy starting at shortstop. Probably not the guy you'd expect to start at shortstop for the Padres. That was certainly with, it's injury related. But then you have O'Hearn out of the lineup. He then pinch hits O'Hearn, and you have O'Hearn at first, you have Cronenworth, then at short, Ariz moves to second. And Shildt was asked after the game, okay, do you see that more as kind of like a late game substitution when you need a bat, or is that something you could see more often? And his thing was, well, to paraphrase, not making your defense more vulnerable for the sake of offense. I think there's a lot of us that's like, let's make that defense vulnerable.
Yeah, because the pitching is not doing so well. Yeah,
you're going down in games, like a little more oomph in the lineup. I think. I
mean, Merrill's not that far away from being a shortstop. I mean, it's not. You're not talking about something like, oh, he was a shortstop 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah,
I
said
would.
This week he would do it.
Yeah, Jackson did.
Somebody asked him, and he was.
He's a young man who's very sure of himself. Well, so sometimes your job is as a manager to be like, yes, he's a young man who's very sure of himself, and that's not the. But I think if I could bequeath upon Mike Shildt something, is just sort of more an openness to different ideas, because this like Ariz at second just really gives me vibes of like second baseman bats second, which is kind of an old joke, but like, what I mean? Like, it's just like, oh, a guy who moves the right along, he has to buy second. It doesn't really seem like thinking about things in a different way. And I would, if I was running them, I would say, hey, Jackson, like, can you take grounders to short today? And let's watch you and see how it feels. And, let's do that for 2 or 3 days, because at the very least, you kind of want to know what happens if Iglesias is out and McCoy gets hurt. Like, is it gonna be terrible, or is it, Jackson's been taking ground balls to short and it's fine. We'll move him. We'll do Tatis in center and everything's fine. So I think Tatis can play in center too. I don't think there's something, you can't be a platinum glove guy in right and like get in center and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. I know the ball kind of comes at you a little bit differently, but this is a guy with pretty elite athletic talents.
Yeah. And I think that's, kind of one of the interesting things about Mike Shildt. Like, he does seem a bit risk averse from that standpoint, and just like, let's try a thing. Like, people are begging for him to switch up the lineup. And I think there are other, examples of this that don't necessarily come to mind right now, but doesn't seem willing to just like throw some stuff against a wall, get weird for a couple games. And if it doesn't work, probably not the end of the world, but maybe there's higher upside there than staying so rigid with your lineup or your approach to a bullpen or whatever.
Throw an opener on Dylan Cease.
There you go. Throw an opener on Dylan Cease.
I mean, he's having trouble with the 5th and 6th inning, man. Throw an opener on Dylan Cease.
Yeah.
You've got a beautiful bullpen. They might have a bunch of lefties at the top for Dylan Cease. Wandy Peralta trots out. Oh, yeah, Dylan Cease is the bulk
David
guy
Morgan action.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the fans too, especially there was a long stretch where they were playing 500 or sub 500 baseball, where it's like, surely there's got to be something. Could we be a little bit more inventive? And that part seems to be missing a little bit. We'll see. I mean,
it's such a good it's a good team. So and I think he has brought a level of some competency and just sort of, he's good every day, like solid guy. He's also calm. So,
yes.
You made a joke about that at the top where, even Mike Shildt is a little worried right now. So he's a decent, and I think maybe the number one job, I've seen a lot of Bruce Bochy, up here in San Francisco. And a tactician, sure, maybe. I think some of the innovative things that he did was probably spurred on a little bit by the front office. I know he's always talking to the front office. Do I think he knew the rules almost better than anybody? Like, if you did something wrong by the rules, he was a hawk. There was a couple of instances he caught other managers, touching the mound twice or something. Like, it's always like there were all these. But the number one thing about Bruce Bochy is that voice. You've all heard it.
You can hear it now.
So calming. It's just the minute you talk to Bruce Bochy, you're like, yeah, things are gonna be all right. Yeah, everything's gonna be all right. Thanks, Bruce. Yeah. Thanks, Boch. So Shilt's not quite the same. He yells a little bit more and he's a little bit more excitable when we see him during games. But I think his general vibe is, we're all good. Keep doing what you gotta do, do the work.
Said yesterday, this too shall pass, and it'll pass soon. So anything you want to plug? It's coming out soon.
Hey, I've got those playoff pitcher rankings coming out tomorrow, and we are always talking ball. It's more of a national thing than a Padres thing over at Rates and Barrels daily podcast. We got Jed Lowry and Trevor May, and we're breaking it down, chopping it up every day.
Love having you on. Thanks so much, Eno.
Thanks for having me.